welcome to day 19 of the TooFatLardies 2022 Advent Calendar. Today, Sid is going to be telling us all about schools of fencing. It's not a subject I know a lot about, but I think most are 6 foot by 4 foot.
Over the last few years in the Oddcast and on my blog, I've talked with Richard and Nick and other friends about finding ways to translate inspiration into building and running practical war games. I really enjoy the process of finding something interesting from history, often something which has been forgotten over time, and trying to bring that centre stage into one of our war games. And that process of translating inspiration into wargaming is always a process of trial and error. My ideas of how to do that best with any particular period of history have, frankly, changed during my attempts to do that over the years. But the process of trying to translate something into a game on a tabletop with friends is always really fascinating. And there's a saying that I really like: let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. And that's true of so many things in life, but it's also true of wargaming and how we design and play war games. Finding inspiration, that element of a game or history of modelling, creates a buzz and an energy that, if you focus on it and look at it in a rounded way, that effort will not be wasted. During 2021, I've been working with Richard and Nick, and also with Martin at War Bases, on With Flashing Blades, our game based on the world of the Three Musketeers and the books and films which create and cluster around that theme. And during the process of writing the rules with Richard, I've read a lot of other wargaming rules for the same or similar combat situations. There's at least a dozen rule sets around, and they're fairly easy to find. And I've also read through the original novel by Alexandre Dumas, as well as other similar books like the series of Captain Alatriste books by Arturo Pérez Reverte. But something caught my eye which wasn't really featured in the Dumas novels or in the other wargames rules, recreating the sword-fighting adventures of musketeers from locations as disparate as Paris, Venice or Mordheim. And that's the very large body of work relating to the different schools of fencing and swordplay, which were written by fencing masters in the 16th and 17th centuries. These were intricately detailed and carefully thought through and very expensively published books on different fencing styles and techniques. And from those books, various different schools of fencing can easily be identified. There was a Spanish style of fencing, which was based around geometric precepts and the detailed science of movement. The key features of the Spanish school were an absence of movement directly towards the enemy, an increased reach, and a focus on both thrusting and cutting with the sword. The Spanish duelists were well known for using offline footwork to the left or the right of their opponent to gain a favourable angle of attack. The Spanish school was more intricate than the rival Italian schools of fencing, which focused not so much on cutting, if at all, but really on thrusting and the full body lunge. The schools of Bologna and Naples were well known for codifying the guards which were used in rapier fencing, and also in the use of a dagger or a main gauche as the sword is thrusted out. And in that position, in a lunge, for example, it's hard to defend blows inside the arc of a rapier. Those attacks can't easily be countered when the body's extended in a lunge or a long thrust. So the dagger or the main gauche helps the fencer defend any thrusts inside the rapier, as it was described. And there are also various styles practiced in France, the location of the action in Dumas' novels, and they frequently were developed by fencing masters who settled in Paris and established their own schools and salons for wealthy patrons to practice in. Some of the French fencing masters were using Italian themes but adding their own techniques. One of my favourites was a master called François Dancy, who taught a less formal school of swordsmanship, but one which was very practically based. And Dancy's book only very briefly describes the posture and the guard which the Italian fencing masters had codified, but Dancy concentrates mainly on drawing the opponent into an attack and then dealing with an overly aggressive opponent. All of these writings are a mass of complex technical terms, movements and techniques, which govern duels and fights which may only last a couple of minutes. So the challenge is really to translate those historical fighting styles into a playable and practical set of wargaming rules. In doing so, we wanted to try and create an engine at the heart of the game, something which would create interesting combat in which players could see the way in which different fighting styles could be used to gain advantages against some, but maybe not, all of their opponents. And that was something that I hadn't really seen in other wargames rules for the settings of the Three Musketeers before. It didn't really come out of Dumas' novel, which, spoiler alert for a book from the 1840s, has very little sword fighting in, but has a lot of intrigue. What I did find, when I looked into the literature of the period, was lots of hints and clues to fencing styles in the plays of Shakespeare, a rather unusual place for a wargamer to be looking. It's pretty clear that a protagonist like Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet uses a Spanish style of fencing with a high guard. In the first scene of the play, we see the fiery Tybalt with his sword prepared, which, as he breathed defiance to my ears, he swung about his head and cut the winds. And Shakespeare was, as I've discovered looking at the literature, a fencing expert and hired a famous Italian swordmaster to choreograph the fight scenes in his plays, and including in Romeo and Juliet. Tybalt's high guard, whereby he swung about his head, and his cutting actions are very characteristic of the Spanish school, even if Shakespeare, being an Englishman, is a bit snooty about the style. I mention this really because taking inspiration and weaving it into a wargame comes from many different places. In fact, finding the inspiration, that spark, like looking at long-forgotten Spanish sword-fighting treatises and Italian fencing books from 17th century Bologna, is just the start of the journey. Lots of hard work weaving that inspiration into a playable wargaming then needs to follow. And in taking that inspiration, I think it helps to try and inject those ideas into the game as simply and as cleanly as possible. But that doesn't prevent that inspiration being centre stage and visible and tangible in many different places in the game that you create. Infusing a game with an idea and an inspiration, one that's yours and is unique, can be a really challenging route to follow. But the results may be unlike any other wargames out there, and that's a journey which brings its own rewards. And it's a journey which echoes the saying that I mentioned before, when you let yourself be silently drawn by the thing that you love, it will not lead you astray. It's the same in wargaming as it is in life.